Good evening, everybody. Welcome along to the League One podcast, and it's a relegation dogfight special this evening. We're joined by our co-host Jack Ward, who's supporting a team that isn't in this conversation in Oxford United. Glad to be looking at it from a downward perspective. And one of Oxford's rivals are Reading, and we're joined by Neill Rees, known as O'Bobbins, from the Tilehurst End. Good evening to you, gents. Thanks for joining us. Neil, apologies for rubbing salt into the wound by pairing you with an Oxford fan tonight. But just wanted to let's talk about the ownership situation at Reading, because I'm sure that's on people's minds a lot this season. There are a few interested parties and a few offers have come into the club recently.
Yeah, there's interest, that's for sure. I think a lot of people were wondering whether we would have interest in a club that is mired in debt, on the downward spiral, and has been for, well, all of Darrell Young's ownership, really. And people wondering, where that investment was possibly going to come from and who would be willing to take it up. But yeah, there certainly seems to be plenty around. Mike Ashley included has not been too quiet in outlining his possibility of making a bid. We've had a few tire kickers, namely like William Story recently. Thankfully, he's been thrown out of the equation. But yeah, there's as we know with the EFL rules, we don't really know too much about who it could be. We won't find out too much unless it's leaked or it's complete. So we're in that limbo land at the moment of not knowing when, although the best estimates have been around about Christmas, New Year, worst case February. But yeah, it depends on a whole manner of things, really. And chiefly, the main one is if Dye is going to accept any of the offers put to him.
I think that's the sort of catch-22 of the situation, Neil, because on the one hand you want new ownership because of Darrell Young's reign and the lack of communication. Subsequently, the lack of communication means you can't have an awful lot of faith that he's going to sell to the right buyer or B at all, because you just don't know what his mind's at and what his thinking is, because he doesn't communicate. But to sort of flip it into a positive, Neil, which I know is hard when it comes to...
There is one.
And the Sell Before We Die campaign, I think, is a real credit to Reading fans, the way they've galvanised and the way they've said this isn't acceptable. And actually, I get the impression that it's that campaign that's actually brought some attention to the club and possibly could play a part in attracting new ownership.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. Without their input and strategy and effort, we certainly wouldn't be in this situation now, I don't think. Just for the sheer fact of putting pressure on Darrell Young to sell, I couldn't attribute that to anything else other than that movement, really. As we all know, that tennis balls on the pitch was the thing that kind of made the news. We weren't the first to do that by any means, but it certainly gained traction. And then we had a march from town to the stadium, which about 2,000 fans turned up for that. All of these things that are visible are backed up by behind the scenes things that people don't see, and a lot of that has been ongoing and purposeful for a long time. And even if the fans don't see it, it's very much there and very much active. And I know people want to see things happening all the time to make it still be a prominent thing. But I think we're getting to the end game now, and I certainly feel that they don't want to be doing this any longer than they have to, and hopefully they won't have to be, protesting or arranging things for too long.
Let's hope that's the case. Said at the top, we're joined by Jack Ward, our co-host from the excellent Jack Ward Football Podcast and the League One Podcast. I recommend you check out both. Jack, what do you make of the situation at Reading from an ownership point of view? Because it's obviously been a really tough time for supporters.
Yeah, and I think it's really, really affected things on the pitch as well. And and that sounds really obvious to say, but you look at the way that football club has been run, and that relegation, it was quite a messy relegation. Certainly not a very simple one, and not a nice way to have to transition into going again in League One. I think teams come down to the League One from the Championship and struggle without a lot of mess ownership wise, and a lot of transition and change that needs to be made. And to come down with that added almost baggage, it's going to make things extremely, extremely difficult, because it's not a simple division to get out of, especially the pace in which teams want to when they get into it. I think when you look at their transfer window, of course, it was a big problem. It was a massive reason why they are where they are. But it's not in their control. There was sort of a period of time where they could sign players, and they brought in some really decent players. I think Sam Smith is obviously an established player in League One, and Nibs hasn't hit the ground running at Reading by any stretch. But at Cambridge, both of those were very, very good individual players. However, then they go back into an embargo, and then they're back when they started again. They then can't recruit and build that squad. The depth of that squad just isn't there. There definitely is talent in areas, but because of that ownership situation, that transition of building a team to compete wasn't possible. There's quality here and there, but the consistency within that quality and the depth within that quality isn't visible. And we've seen that since the start of the season, hence the position they find themselves in. I think the games have also shown that they can be good. They really, really can be effective. And then the capitulation falls straight on its backside, and they're in a really difficult position. Pompey stands out. They go 2-0 up, and then a period of time in the middle of the match, they were just dreadful and fell apart. And Pompey, of course, being top of the table in very high spirits with incredible mentality that they've built, find a way back into the game. But at 2-0, any team, whoever you're playing, you should be better at controlling a game than that, and they completely fell on their backside. So, yeah, I think it's, from an external perspective and taking my Oxford hat away from it, you never want to see a football club in that position. And they clearly have, to be honest, they've got a lot of work to do. But the first one is getting a new owner and then having to rebuild a squad. And if you can stay in League One within all of that, I think that's a massive achievement. But right now, that looks a real struggle.
Yeah, absolutely. Neill, there's definitely a part of the fan base, and perhaps you can tell me how big that part is, that is almost resigned to relegation because of where the club is in the table at the moment, and the points haul you've got. And yet at the same time, there's part of me that looks at the results you've got in the EFL Trophy, for example, where you've thumped Exeter 9-0, Swindon 5-0. Okay, it was particularly youthful Swindon side, but you beat Arsenal 5-2 the other night in under 21s. And I think even in the league, Jack mentioned there, alluded to parts of performances that held promise, and then capitulation, like at Shrewsbury, for example. And I'm just wondering whether it could be a case of you put 2 or 3 solid, experienced heads into this team if the takeover can happen before January. Do you think 2 or 3 of the right additions would mean everything then clicks into place for Reading? Or is this a situation where only a massive January rebuild could give Reading any sort of chance?
I think it's, for one thing, it's the pressure. I think Jack alluded to it well there, in that the pressure of League One is a lot different than the Bristol Street Motors Trophy, to give it its proper name, is a lot different than League One. You could see that the players don't cope with the pressure very well away from home. Specifically, we've only had 2 points in the last year away from home, and that shows you how difficult it is for them. And when we were relegated, we had a whole squad ripped away. It wasn't a case of a rebuild that we wanted. It was an enforced rebuild. And yeah, some players we've got in, but they haven't really gelled yet. So to say that we need more players in January, I'm not sure, because
really
that would just kind of upset things even further. And I'm not sure if we could. I mean, at the moment, we're at the current limit that we can attract. We can't get any more players in January unless we have new owners by then.
Do you think you will have new owners by then?
Hopefully, but it depends on what they want to do and whether they want to sit back and wait. From what I understand, parties that are interested won't really care too much whether we're in League One or League Two, because the players that you're going to sign, you're not going to be signing for money. You're going to be signing, frees or players that are let go from Premier and Championship clubs. So money doesn't come into it. You've still got that same pool of players that any other team can pick up from for free. What the appetite is for that, I don't know. And who's going to come? Who's going to want to come to a side that is in the relegation zone, if not bottom, with the promise of better? It's a tricky one to square off. Really, we'd like it. I mean, every club wants new players to come in a transfer window, but it does depend on so many factors, I think. And to your initial point, I reckon, that there are people that will say, we're as good as down already. I think I'm one of them.
Really?
Simply because it needs a seismic change in, not fortune, that's the wrong word, but that mental shift from what they feel now as players.
I know what you're saying, but then I also think that maybe that mental shift could happen quicker than
I think
than
it
you
will.
maybe
But
think. Like the result, one player can have an influence, or
but I put it akin to having match fitness, in that
right.
you can be fit and functional, but it takes you a while to get match fitness. And I think this is going to be the same. Once the weight is off, I don't think that's going to be a light bulb moment. I think it's going to be a transition, and we might hit form in like March, and by that point, it's probably too late. We might pick up a position or two, maybe, but all the other teams around us, if they sign players, then they could have a bounce as well. So I don't think we'll have enough of a bounce to overtake those other teams.
It might take it sounds really horrible, but a relegation into League Two is that total reset, isn't it? And I think if there is a new owner, if they've got a decision to make, they can go for it in January, like Gab said, and try and be as ambitious as they possibly can, and also legally can as well, because EFL will be very, very careful as to what they can do in January. They won't just be able to spend the cash, and whoever comes in, they won't be able to sort of throw money at it. So they've got to be careful in that sense. Or they go, we'll have a few experienced heads, it probably won't be enough. But that plan will say that in the summer, if that relegation does come and they are long-term investors and long-term owners, that big transition, that big reset will happen then. Because ultimately, a new owner coming into a side, let's say before January, where you could be nearly 10 points adrift in the bottom four, let's say every time, worst case scenario, that's a massive, massive decision, and they've got to get it right. And I think it could be risk or less risk worthy to hold out and maybe wait until the summer. But of course, that does mean a relegation, and that does mean back-to-back falls down the pyramid.
Yeah,
but it's a decision that they have to make, and what they feel as though makes sense for them.
Yeah, and I think the other aspect is that we don't want to be in a situation again where we get another owner that goes, right, we're going to throw money at this thing, and we go, no, don't, because that's the last thing that we want is an owner that is, taking risks to get us out of a hole and put us in a worse situation when the new ownership has only been in play for a couple of months. We don't want that. We want, even if we do go down, it's much better to have a nice stable platform than
a structure as well. That football structure is going to be really important.
Yeah, and
that football structure needs to be built from top to bottom, and that will take time.
Yeah, exactly right, and I think short-term fixes is not what we need. And the new owner will be looking at the current situation and hedging their bets on where we're going to end up, no matter what influence they have in the short term of 2, 3, 4 months. How much can they really do? It is a case of, do they let us go down another division, and how much can you fight? within reason to keep you in League One. It's such a tricky one. No one's got the answer to it, unfortunately. But if we can pick up a few results in January and we're in with a shout of getting out of the relegation zone, then that'd be great. But on current form, it's hard to see where that's really coming from, especially away from home. We were 2-1 up in the 90 odd minutes against Shrewsbury and we still lost.
No, that's very frustrating for sure. Neill, I'm conscious that I want to bring in Jon Palmer from Cheltenham Town in a moment. So if you could keep this slightly concise, this
sure.
next answer. Well, I've got a couple of questions, just quick fire if you like.
All right.
First of all, Ruben Sellers, and whether you'd believe that under the new ownership, he deserves to stay on as head coach. And 2, who are the key players to try and build around for the rest of the season to try and give yourselves some sort of chance to stay up?
Yeah, that's a tricky one about Sellers. I mean, he doesn't know his own settled side yet. He doesn't know what that is. And to not know that in November, and we don't have, crippling injuries or anything like that, it's really hard to know whether, he's still going to be fancied by the new owners or not. And again, much like bringing new players in, who's going to be wanting to take over as manager if he was sacked? Everyone touts Warnock and things like that, but is the appetite there? Who's going to be wanting to do it? So, yeah, if I was a betting man, I think he's probably here for the rest of the season, I would say. And as for players, Nelson Abbey in defence, he's getting regularly picked for England under 20s, so that he's got calibre. Lewis Wing, he's now fit and starting to provide assists.
Did well at Wickham last season, Lewis Wing. Yeah.
Yep. And Sam Smith, now he's fit. He scored 3 and 3. He's starting to look like the player that we want him to be. And Sellers has sort of like adjusted the formation to kind of suit him a bit better as well. So yeah, they would be the main 3 for me.
Lovely stuff. Well, Neill, hopefully the ownership situation gets resolved and it can be a bit of a brighter future for Reading, but we really appreciate you unpacking it with us and keep up the great work with the Tilehurst End.
No problem. Cheers. Thank you.
Cheers, Neill.
Thank you.
Delighted to bring in Jon Palmer from the Gloucestershire Echo on Cheltenham Town. Good evening, John. How are you?
Evening, Gab. Very well, thanks. Evening, Jack. How are you? Evening, Neill.
Yeah, great to have you on the show. Just wondering, after that performance against Wigan, is there a little bit of encouragement to have from that after what went before at Wimbledon the week before?
Yeah, definitely. I think that was probably Cheltenham's best all-round performance of the season, even though they didn't get 3 points. I think it was the first time they haven't had to dig out. The wins have probably been a little bit against the run of play, or really grinding it out and sustaining a lot of pressure. Whereas against Wigan, I think they were really unlucky not to win it. And although Wigan saw a penalty saved, it would have been a real travesty if Cheltenham hadn't got at least a point. But I think most people would agree, watch the game, that Cheltenham were the better side and a bit unlucky not to win it. So yeah, real encouraging signs from that one.
John, who have been the key players for Cheltenham's sort of revival under Darrell Clarke?
Will Goodwin deserves a mention for the way he's played since he got himself fit again. Clarke seems to really like him, put a lot of faith in him. Unfortunately, Aidan Keener, as we chatted last time I came on, hasn't been firing this season. So but Goodwin's grabbed his opportunity and done well. But I think against Wigan, that was the midfield 3 that stood out and got a lot of praise. I think it was Curtis Davis's best performance in the Cheltenham shirt as well, actually. So I'll give him a mention. But Thompson, Sercombe, without Bonds with the injury, and that Sercombe playing a little bit more attacking, and Pett coming in, and Darrell Clarke knows what he's all about. He seems to love playing for Darrell Clarke. So Thompson, Pett, and Sercombe with Bonds still to come. That's quite an exciting midfield quartet, really, to pick any 3 of them. With Dan Adshead and Ellis Chapman seeming on their way out, I think that's a pretty good for Cheltenham. I think that's as good as it's going to get, in my opinion. Those 4 options in centre midfield.
Jack, John mentioned there Curtis Davies having his best performance and Curtis Thompson looking a real tenacious presence in midfield as well. And I just feel like when Darrell Clarke's been at his best as a manager, it's been with a core of players who get his way of working, who kind of go with him and who he knows he can trust. Do you feel like those are a couple of players who he might have at Cheltenham?
Yeah, I do. And I think what must be praised, and John's been, I think, pretty honest in saying this, he's been ruthless, Darrell Clarke, since he's come in. And that's been really, really clear. You mentioned their players that have almost been, not out in the cold, but definitely been told that the future probably isn't going to be regular football under Darrell Clarke. And he's been very, very honest in the early stages of his tenure there that that's going to be the case. I think that's important. It can go one of two ways. It proves that there is a real level of respect, and it proves the ownership. But at Cheltenham, generally do believe Darrell Clarke is a long-term appointment and somebody that they feel as though is going to be here for a long period of time, and trust that he's going to have to rebuild and change the way this squad is looked at. Because before he came in, let's be honest, Cheltenham were a one-way trip to League Two. That had to be a massive shift. They had to make some big calls. And they are harsh. Football is a pretty harsh business, and telling players that have only been at the football club in November, and players are already being told they're probably not going to be part of the plans, and they're going to be looking at a move in January. And some players have already, I believe, returned to the parent clubs on loan. I could be wrong there, but there are a couple that have gone back. So he's had to be very, very, very ruthless in the way that he's approached and look at this squad, and had to almost do a rebuild without a transfer window in the middle of November by bringing in, again, a group of players and almost galvanising a group of players that work rock bottom, but also creating a core as well. And like you say, Curtis Davies is somebody that's done it for a long period of time at Derby County and other football clubs. And again, to come in, we always knew that leadership quality that he does bring is going to be important. And, if he can start being that key figure this Cheltenham team do require and have needed for pretty much at the start of the season, it hasn't quite been there naturally. They're going to be in a much, much better place. So, yeah, Darrell Clarke, it seems as though only in November, after only being there, 2 months or so, that could be generous, he has done a really, really good job at galvanising a team that at one point looked as though it was going to be one-way ticket to League Two, for sure.
Certainly has. John, I want to ask you about the importance of protecting Curtis Davies, because you mentioned how good he was against Wigan, but he's probably going to play well in terms of dominating the box and winning his headers. He's probably not going to relish too many of those one-on-one duels. So how well did Cheltenham stop him from sort of getting into those situations?
Yeah, I mean, he was one of a lot of players who had a poor game against Wimbledon, and he would be the first to admit that. Everything went wrong that day. Cheltenham were 5-0 down at one stage against a team from League Two, which I wouldn't say Cheltenham are a bigger club than Wimbledon, but you shouldn't be 5-0 down against a team from lower division, should you really? So he responded well against Wigan. He wasn't exposed. There have been a couple of times this season where somebody's given him the run around a little bit, particularly against Bolton. But when he's been up, pick out Colby Bishop at Portsmouth, did a really good job against him. Loft at Port Vale shackled him well, and against Wigan, the back three actually as a whole were good. Freestone scored no goal, he gave a penalty away, but apart from that, he had a good game. It sounds awful, but you know what Lewis Freestone's all about. He just had a couple of unfortunate incidents in the game, but he's a reliable performer.
Sure.
Davies in the middle, and then Bevan, been really impressed with Owen Bevan on the right. He's been definitely easily the pick of the loan signings, and Sean Long obviously been switching a little bit between right wing back and right centre back. He played right wing back against Wigan. Davies is he won't play Tuesday, Saturday. He will have rests. Bevan might move into the middle. Long might move into the back three. Tom Bradbury could come into the back three. But it's I was interested in listening to Neill talking about Reading needing a seismic change. All around the club, ownership especially, but it feels like Cheltenham, as big as it's going to get, they've had their seismic change really, I think, with what happened in September. And as Jack said, there's no transfer window for Darrell to work in yet, but he's already signed Tom Pett, who looks a really good signing already, and he's already picked some that he trusts and he wants to be involved, and he's already picked a few that are going to be on their way out. So he is making a big impact.
Certainly is. John, you mentioned there that maybe you don't need maybe quite as much a seismic change. But I do remember you mentioning a couple of weeks ago that there is going to be plenty of movement in January as well. Do you still stand by the number? I think it was sort of 8 or 9 outgoings and possibly 5 or 6 incomings. Is that are those numbers still feeling accurate to you, or have you had a kind of change of thought on that? Or
I still think there'll be a big shift around, but I think there's a more of an established core players now that Darrell Clarke does want to be part of the plans. But I think the biggest opportunity, because there's not going to be much to spend in January, having 7 loan players at the moment, as Jack said, Luciano Dore Henry's already gone back to Fulham, I understand, although his loan will continue officially until January. He's back training with Fulham now. I think 2 or 3, maybe even 4 of the other loans will return, and hopefully they go on to do well somewhere else. But I don't think they're what Darrell doesn't feel like it's what he needs at the moment in his squad. Bevan, I'd be really disappointed if he left because he's been excellent. So, but there's an opportunity there to get maybe 1 or 2 real high quality loans in and trim down 4 or 5, and then he's transfer listed. Dan had said Ellis Chapman, James Olayinka, Grant Horton's available for loan, although he hasn't been written off yet. So there's, obviously it relies on people coming in and signing these players, and the players agreeing to go because they're still in the contract.
Risky move, isn't it? I suppose
it is. Yeah, I think
massively ruthless.
He gave them all a chance. Grant Horton's been a bit unlucky with injuries since he came back from Ireland, and he hasn't seen enough of him, I would imagine, yet to fully make his mind up. But Ellis Chapman played a lot of games the year Cheltenham won the League 2 title, but I think he does need a new start somewhere. There's been a bit of interest from Bromley in the National League. Whether that one goes through or not, I'm not sure. But Dan had said again, he came in last summer, looked like a good player on paper, and he started well in pre-season, but he's had injuries as well, and it just doesn't look like it's going to happen for him now. Olayinka's a real talent, but again, I think it's more the grit that maybe the side of his game that he needs to develop. It's not easy. He's just come out of Arsenal, but I think when it's going to be sort of roll your sleeves up and what Darrell's all about, getting players up for it and battling, grinding out results and battling to these 15 wins that he wants, and he's got 2 already, so 13 from 30 games. Still looks like a tall order, but at least they're giving themselves a chance. But I think he wants a little bit more experience in there, a little bit more players that have been there and done it. So I'm expecting a much smaller squad in January because there's still 30 players being paid at the moment by Cheltenham, if you include the 7 loans. So that's ridiculous, isn't it? So that's what there is an opportunity to trim it down, lift the quality, and without spending a huge amount more money.
I tell you what, with that in mind, John, I think I have to give the club some credit for sanctioning the deals for Tom Pett. A little bit like what they did for Michael Duff with the Luke Varney signing, when the squad, when Michael Duff first came in, was pretty big, and you're thinking there's not much room, but they actually brought him in, and it was actually quite a crucial signing at the time. And hopefully Tom Pett can be that for Darrell Clarke, given the relationship that he has. And I just hope that, now that you've got a bit more of a settled situation, it can be a bit more focused on just getting the quality, 2 or 3 of quality in, and maybe sort of trimming the squad down a bit. But it's great to see Cheltenham have a bit of hope, isn't it?
Yeah, Pett came on against Wimbledon. The game was already lost, but he was the one player that Darrell praised after the game for the way that he calmed everything down and started to dictate play, and he was excellent against Wigan. Like you said, the board deserve a bit of credit, but he is on literally, Darrell described it as peanuts. He is on a ridiculously low salary at the moment. Maybe the board said, he started the season without a club. He's not going to be fully fit. Let's just he can have a look at Cheltenham. Cheltenham can have a look at him. Clarke knows what he's all about, but I'm sure in January he'll get a longer and more lucrative contract. The way that he started, if he can carry on like he has been, get himself a little bit fitter as he goes. But he's obviously a fit lad anyway. So that's been a really good one. Good comparison with Varney. When you have managerial changes, you normally get a bloated squad. It's normally a bad sign, isn't it, that you're left with a sort of hangover of players that don't really feature. So it is a skill in itself trying to move players on. And he's been very honest with them. Some of them are going to be going, some of them aren't going to play. So it's up to them now whether they want to just sort of hang around and hope for the best, or whether they actually want to go and try and grab an opportunity somewhere else. But those loans that haven't quite worked out, as we discussed before, there is a lot of talent there. It's just having 5 or 6 of them in a squad that's bottom of League One probably isn't going to be what Cheltenham need at the moment. So I hope they all, as has happened before, players, you wouldn't have necessarily thought have gone right to the top that have been on loan at Cheltenham. It's not necessarily their fault. It's just not worked out, probably due to the terrible start, as Jack said earlier. It was a almost unbelievably bad start to the season. To go 11 games without a goal is some achievement. So that does seem like a long way away now, which is good. The goals are starting going in. There's 9 points on the board, even though Reading shouldn't be bottom really. Psychologically, I think it helps Cheltenham being second bottom, and they've got an unbelievable run of games coming up between now and January the 1st, where they're going to be playing. We'll know a lot more after the games against Orient, Carlisle, Shrewsbury, Reading, Northampton. That's leading up to New Year's Day. After a couple of tough games they got first, that's going to, I think, by January, even before the window opens, I think they'll have a good shout of whether they're going to be still in contention or not.
Yeah, well, that's it looks on paper like a nice opportunity to add some points to the tally. So hopefully the club can take that. Jon, it's been so lovely to get your insight as always. I always look forward to these chats. So thanks for joining us, and hopefully see you at a game soon.
Yeah, good to see you both. Cheers. See ya.
Cheers, Jon. Delighted to introduce our next guest, which is Sam Parks from Exeter City. Good evening, Sam. How are you, mate?
Yeah, good. Thanks for having me on, guys. A real pleasure. Great to be here.
Oh, cheers, mate. Pleasure's all ours. In terms of Exeter City, probably been a bit less of a pleasure lately. How much have injuries been a factor in terms of the drop in form, and how much of, I suppose, everyone at the club should be held accountable for the form that you've been in? Because it has been quite a plummet, hasn't it?
Yeah, look, it's been a major plummet. We were sitting top of the table after about 5 or 6 games. Back in September. It was a really bright start to the season for the Exeter City. We had some really good players. Trevor in from Brentford, who I guess we'll go on to talk about. He's been brilliant, but we've really been hit by injuries. Players like Nieskin, new signing, the Finnish wing back, out injured. He's only just come back. Dion Rankin, the winger from Chelsea, he's only just come back. And then of course the big one, Dimitri Mitchell, out with that ACL for 9 months, and he was our star man. So it's been tough, and I think a lot of that form can be down to injuries, but up front as well, there just hasn't been any goals. Sam Nombe left for a big fee to Rotherham, so yeah, being unable to replace him and then couple it in with the injuries, it's not been good for the Grecians.
I'll hold my hands up a little bit on this one, Sam, because when Sam Nombe was sold, I think it was for about was it £1 million or £1 million? I was kind of in favour of it, because I think for a club of Exeter City size, that's £1 million is still a huge amount of money, and to build something sustainably, you need that kind of income. When you consider Crewe probably sold 4 of their golden generation for about £1 million combined, so that was a great offer. But I think the timing of it probably wasn't helpful, because it was difficult to get the right replacement. I suppose. Is that going to be looked at as quite a significant moment in Exeter City season?
Yeah, look, I think it really is a significant moment. I think, you have to take the money if you're Exeter City. We're a supporter-owned club at the end of the day. We're not a rich club in League One by any means at all. And, Sam Nombe, his contract was running out at the end of the season, and he's not going to sign a new one. So I think maybe the timing wasn't right, but cashing him was the right thing to do. My only question is, the club knew he was going to go, and they should have been looking deeper into these replacements before he went. He went just a few games into the season, which was very frustrating, and that really leaves a lack of time to sign a new striker. And we haven't. We signed Admiral Musquet from Luton on loan, but he hasn't been anything to shout about really. So I can understand the decision, but the timing of the decision is really something that I question. I think a lot of other Exeter City fans will be questioning and scratching their head out.
Jack, I look at Reading and they've got Sam Smith. I look at Fleetwood and they've got Jack Marriott. I look at Northampton and they've got Sam Hoskins. These are players that are gonna, rack up the big numbers in terms of, goals. And I just wonder with Exeter City, how important is this January going to be? The club's released a statement saying they're willing to back manager Gary Caldwell through this challenging run, which I think is fantastic communication for the club. I'm glad that they've been able to see the bigger picture when probably clubs of a different mindset maybe wouldn't. but January, in terms of what they're prepared to spend and bring in the right centre forward, is just going to be absolutely huge, isn't it?
And clubs now know that they need a centre forward, so they're not negotiation wise. That isn't always ideal, is it? I think it's a really refreshing statement, Gab. I think you're correct. I think it's one of those that, I don't know. I'm just saying, Matt Taylor got sacked from Rotherham at the same time as that statement was released. Whether that was a little dig, I'm not entirely sure. But it was.
I don't think it was a dig. I think actually it could have. Sorry to kind of interrupt. I actually think it was maybe that sort of, if there was a portion of Exeter City fans that were kind of, their thinking on Gary Caldwell was influenced a little bit by Matt Taylor's availability. I think it was more that than necessarily a dig at Rotherham, who the club have got no sort of relationship with. But I'm glad, because I do believe that as a fan base, you've got to look at a manager on their own merits. Once you start comparing them to this manager, that manager, and the other, I think you sort of get into dangerous territory. Sometimes I think you've got to judge managers on their own merits. And I'm glad that Exeter released the statement that they did.
I think it's also really important they communicated that, because Gary Caldwell, I think what we've already seen, is a very streaky manager. They'll go on fantastic runs and they'll also go and lose 5, 6, 7, it could be 8.
Yeah, in a tough run of fixtures with injuries.
In a tough run of fixtures, but I think 8 defeats from 8, whoever you're playing in League One, isn't ideal, is it? You can accept a few, but 8 straight defeats is a pretty. I mean, it's sackable form, isn't it? Let's be honest. Managers have been sacked with worse form, so they had to be
with better form.
Better form, sorry. I mean, they probably have been sacked with worse form as well, but better form for sure. So it's a really, really refreshing thing a football club have done there, and it's very, very rare. We haven't seen it before. But I think you're correct. I think going into a transfer window, knowing you do need a striker, knowing that everybody knows you need a striker, isn't the best negotiation position whatsoever. I think losing Mitchell is again one of those that's like, he was a player that could sort of provide a moment of magic. He could be someone that, we haven't got a striker, but Dimitri Mitchell is going to do something special and could win us a game. He's that type of player. Him not being there, a striker situation that looks a little bit bleak, let's be honest, at the moment. They do need to go and bring in one. If you could bring in 2 centre forwards, that's the perfect January. Again, they've got to be the right fit. You signed Musquay on loan at the end of the window. And I live with an Exeter fan. And I won't say exactly how he has described his performances, but let's put it that way. He hasn't been overly impressed. So he's not impacting games. And I think that's the biggest issue. He's not impacting games. He's not scoring the required number of goals. And Gab, like you said there are proven clinical strikers that are around you in this relegation fight that, let's be honest, you're currently a part of. And without one, and without moments of magic with players also being injured, other than Trevitt, that squad does need a real spark in the window. Whether or not you can do that and how much of money is going to be given to Gary Caldwell, I mean, clearly there's going to be a pot of some sort, but what's in that pot's going to be a massive dictatorship as to who you're going to bring in and also how many you can bring in, let's be honest.
Yeah, definitely. I think a lot of it is what you said. We're going to have to look elsewhere for these strikers. Teams up and down, up and down the pyramid are going to be looking at us and thinking they need goals. They need goals quickly. And I think, looking in League Two, looking in League One, that's not where we're going to get our strike from. So Gary could go back up to Scotland and find a striker. We know that's where he found James Scott, who's not firing. He found Dimitri Mitchell there as well. So, expect the Grecians to find
non-league as well, possibly some.
Yeah, we had a few links with non-league at the end of the window, but nothing formulated. But I think that's going to be the place where we find a striker if we find one. Not in League One or League Two, unfortunately. Yeah,
you're probably not going to not going to have the budget to buy a striker off League Two clubs if they're in great form. I suppose the only exception to that might be maybe Luke Armstrong, for example, at Harrogate, where his value might have gone down because he's not really been playing for them, and they've pretty much confirmed that he's going to be available in January. So we'll see. In terms of areas that Exeter need to strengthen other than up top, Sam, because it does sound like you are going to be able to spend a few quid. What are the areas that you're going to be looking at?
It's got to be the defence, I think, as well. We've been leaking goals recently. But it's just been sloppy play all round. Gary's mentioned these 2 boxes analogy all the time, in the box up front and then in the box at the back. So I think, Gary will definitely looking for a new centre-back. Czech Diabate's back from injury, but Gary Caldwell doesn't seem to rate him. I
thought
do
he was
really
brilliant
highly.
in the promotion season, Sam.
Yeah, I thought he was quality. He's really young. I know he's had injury, bad luck, but I think he's a quality centre back. He looks, composed in the air, quite good on the ball as well. But Gary hasn't really tended to go with him. He's stuck with Aimson, Sweeney, and Hartridge, which, decent in the air, but they kind of lack that ability on the ball, and we've seen that quite a lot. Them 2 games against Wigan, where we had like 50 odd shots across 2 games. They were just moving the ball too slowly, and I think Gary's going to want someone and should get someone that can move the ball quickly and is better with their feet in that January window.
It's interesting because I think Pierce Sweeney is good with his feet, because if you go back to the promotion season, there are a few goals that Timothy Dieng scored where it was kind of Josh Key knocking it back in the diagonal from Sweeney, and I think he is very progressive. Whether he's a League One defender is something that I would probably be inclined to question. I'd love to get your sort of thoughts on that.
Look, I think, like you said, Pierce Sweeney, he's great from a dead ball as well. He can whip them diagonals in. He's done it in this campaign as well a couple of times. A few nice balls to Dimitri Mitchell across the pitch. But I think he does lack, that composure of a League One centre-back. He hasn't had the experience in this league other than last season before. Unlike Will Aimson, who's played for Bolton for numerous seasons. He's got that experience. And I just, there's moments where I see Pierce Sweeney and I think that's not probably the most composed thing. So I do agree with you, Gab, but I think he always offers a dimension. I think he's good in the dressing room as well. He's a very experienced player. We call him Mr. Exeter City. He's been there that long. So whether he should be starting is a question. And I think the club will look to strengthen in his position and put him under a bit of pressure, but he's definitely still a good one to have around the club.
Absolutely. Well, hopefully Exeter can strengthen in both boxes and maybe have a bit more luck with injuries in the second half of the season. Sam, thanks so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure to chat, and hopefully link up with you later in the season, mate.
A pleasure. Thank you, guys.
Cheers, mate.
Take care. Cheers, Sam.
Delighted to be joined by Ross Parkinson, a very happy Ross Parkinson, I'll add, supporter of Carlisle United, who have just had completed a takeover this afternoon. The Piatak family, an American business, they've completed the takeover of Carlisle United, and Ross, it seems like the main sort of reaction of Carlisle fans is sort of excitement, really.
Yeah, hugely positive. They've been really, really impressive in everything they've done. This has been rumbling on since midway through last season. But obviously with the debt situation we had with Edinburgh Woolen Mill and then Purepay, it was a really complicated deal to get over. But the Piataks have been very, very transparent, very open with everything they could share. The family came over and did a presentation to the trust membership because the trust have agreed to downgrade their shares from 25.4% to 10% to get this deal through. That has meant that they had to sort of sell the sale to the trust members, and Tom Senior, the dad of the family, spoke for about an hour and a half with no script on exactly why he chose us, what he wants to do. It was all hugely impressive, and unlike a lot of takeovers, I have no reservations about this one at the moment. They might come in the future, but at the moment, everything looks great.
Yeah, I think a lot of the time, especially when it's fans from the outside looking in who haven't sort of don't quite know the ins and outs, I think there's sometimes an element of cynicism over foreign ownership because people kind of question the motivation and there sort of can be this sort of fetishization of fan ownership, which I think idealistically it would be wonderful, but and we've just spoken to an Exeter City fan who supports a fan-owned club, and that's wonderful. Sometimes it's just not practical, and I think that if owners show a willingness to embrace the fabric of the club, to undergo a due process to acquire the control, which involves sort of getting a feel for the club and sending out the right messages and engaging with people. You still don't know for certain, but I think generally it's just a really encouraging sign. And from the way you've spoken about the Piatak family and the way they've connected with the fan base, it just feels like this has opened up a really exciting dawn for the football club.
Yeah, I think the biggest key and that one of the sort of things that's leveled at American owners in particular is debt on the club. Now, what they've promised is there is never ever going to be debt. Any investment they make will be equity in the club. Now, the investment that we need is quite significant because the ground is a brilliant place, but it needs a lot of upkeep. It's a very old football stadium now. They don't want to move. They are committed to upgrading Brunton Park if possible. They also want to build a training ground, which if you're building a training ground from scratch, you're talking £3-4 million. A lot of owners would loan that money to the club and deal with it that way. They have promised that any investment will be equity only.
Wonderful.
So it's just no debt, no problems, nothing that's going to cost us down the line if they disappear at any point. It's all just nice and secure, which is relieving, to say the least.
I can imagine. Jack, what sort of future does this open up for Carlisle United, do you think?
I mean, it's hard to say. I think, to be honest with you, I think I haven't seen a lot of what these owners are going to do. I think, to be honest with you, I heard rumblings of a takeover and now it's gone through. That's brilliant. But until we sort of see exactly the way they approach an ownership strategy, that's going to be really interesting and quite telling. Whether or not that investment comes into the playing squad as soon as January, I'm not sure. Or how they're looking to approach things. Again, it is quite up in the air, something that I'm sure we can go into detail about in just a second, because Carlisle are still in a position where relegation is a possibility and they can invest in January and put that squad into a much better place and give them the best chance of survival. But I think this ownership, from what it looks like, is quite a long-term one. It doesn't seem that it's one that is going to come in and pump money in January and then leave quickly. This seems to be a long-term thing. And as much as it's harsh and maybe not so true, but whichever league they're in, if it's League One or League Two, this ownership is here for the long term and here for the long run. And if it is in League Two, the aspiration will be to get straight back into this league. Of course, if they can stay in this league for as long as possible, that's going to be the aim for the ownership, to stay playing at the highest level and be competing in the best position. So it's hard to say. I don't know clearly exactly what they're trying to do. I don't think every Carlisle fan will yet, and even the owners themselves won't know exactly how they're going to look at it. A lot of it will chop and change as things develop. Football's ever changing, as we know. But yeah, it puts them in a much more sustainable position. It puts them in a much more stable position too, and it gives them the best chance of making this season a successful one, and the long term too, of course, as well.
Yeah. So on the January investment, in the talk we had with the Piataks when they spoke about the plans and why they chose Carlisle United, the transfer budget was described as a step change.
Right, that's promising.
So significant change. Also, they had hoped to get this deal done in August. So they have budgeted for 2 transfer windows for this season. And they have said that basically because that money's been set aside anyway in their business plan, all of that money is available in January. Now, going forward, the hope is that you won't need to throw a lot of money at it all the time, because we'll be able to sell players on a training ground. This is where you're going to train. This is what the ground's going to look like. This is the players you're going to be playing with. But in the short term, and particularly this season, to stay at this level, we have the funds available to go, okay, they've offered you, throwing a number out, £1,500 a week. There's 1,800. To do that in the short term, and I think that is something that has cost us dearly this summer, because we've not been able to do that for probably 15 years. Actually, maybe not even in my lifetime. We've lost out on deals for players.
So 50 years.
Yeah. So we've lost out on deals for players this summer that went to non-league clubs, because non-league clubs were paying 25% more than we are.
Is there any? I'm sure there isn't, but roughly number wise, what could we be talking in terms of, or How much could you spend? How much is
I
2
don't know.
windows worth of a lucrative?
Yeah,
I know
I
you wouldn't
don't
give a figure,
know.
but what is 2 windows
couldn't
worth?
give an actual figure. I would imagine that by January the 1st, that our record transfer will be broken. Bearing in mind our record transfer is Joe Garner at about 140 grand. I imagine that
140
will be
grand, still
broken.
140 grand. If you can beat that transfer
Yeah.
budget on one player, I still think in League One right now isn't over £100,000 is still probably seen as a pretty sizable transfer fee.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, you see what thing. I don't think it's going to be the Wrexham £8 a week for some players that we've seen, but I think we'll be able to go and maybe say to a player is £2,000, £3,000, £4,000 a week, which is the levels we've never got near to now. I wouldn't imagine we've got anyone even close to those levels at the minute in the squad. I know one of the players we're trying to keep, Owen Moxon, has been offered a deal that is more than, according to Paul Simpson, more than anyone's ever been paid at Carlisle United.
Do you reckon he'll sign it?
Has yet to. Well, if he was going to sign it, I think he might have signed it by now, being perfectly honest. But for him, he's 25, 26 years old now. He's not a young player. So if he's maybe had his head turned, then maybe this is his opportunity to go up a level. I would question anyone looking to leave us right now to go to the same level. I think if he had the opportunity, because Blackpool was
It
the main
depends. I mean, if it's a Portsmouth or a Bolton type,
yeah.
club,
If you think they're going to be playing in the Championship next season, then fair enough. But I think the target of next season that they've already said is to get out of this league the right way. Is to be challenging for that top 6 for next season.
Oh my gosh,
that sounds like decent money, to be honest.
Yes,
and again, but purely because, and you'll hopefully agree with me, that this squad right now is nowhere near that level.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I would argue the squad now is weaker than it was last season.
And at the moment,
in terms of the squad.
But Ross, that's if you're saying Carlisle want to try and chat. Let's say for the sake of argument, Carlisle do stay up this season, which is another thing we'll kind of come on to. Say that happens, you're looking at 2 transfer windows to turn this squad, which you've already said is weaker than the one that was in League 2 last year, into one that can get into the top 6 of League 1. That feels like that's very ambitious to me.
It is. I don't think it's something that they would hang Simpson's job on. It's just the aim.
I hope not.
It's to have a budget that has the capability to achieve that, and it might take longer than that. But
I would say progress would seem like a better target than top 6. That feels.
I think the target now, based on how the season's gone, I think recruitment was poor in the summer. I think it was hampered by the budget because we've got outgoing owners who, to be fair to them, have given everything they could,
of course,
in the summer, but it wasn't much. And like I say, when you're missing out on players to sort of National League teams because of 25% wages, it's not like the sort of you can get away with a couple £100 here and there. It's significant amounts to these lads, and you don't blame them for taking the money for going to non-league.
Yeah.
But I think we're in the right place, and even if it takes a couple of years, I think, all things considered, I think we'll play in the Championship in the near future for at least a season or 2. We'll get that opportunity to do that, and where we go from there, who knows?
Well, that certainly sounds exciting. A little bit. I want to say over the top input. There's a very strong instinct for me that says,
I'm not talking about next season. I'm thinking in the
next
I know
you're not. I know you're not. I just feel like I do feel a little bit like you want to walk in the right direction rather than sort of run in the wrong one. So I think stabilisation is really important for Carlisle. And part of that, Ross, will be achieving survival this season. What's required this January with that healthy budget that you've mentioned there to turn this squad into one that's going to give you the players that Paul Simpson needs to preserve your League One status?
Very similar issues to Exeter. The squad's absolutely decimated with injuries at the moment. Similar to last season, except I think last season we kind of, where the injuries were, they weren't focused, so we were able to put teams out constantly and still win games. But this season, both of our right backs are out injured now. There is a rumour of one coming in this week. We've got Paul Huntington's now out injured for the second time this season with a calf injury. Callum Guy's out for
retirement, couldn't he, Huntington? 34,
yeah, it's
35,
probably.
right?
I mean, he's only a couple of years younger than me. He's no spring chicken anymore. And I think this was probably always going to be one of his last seasons. But he was excellent for us last year, and he's been solid enough this year when he has played. We've come to that point, and I think partially that's why we signed Sam Lavelle as that kind of natural successor to that thing, because he's a leader. He's already the captain when Huntington's not playing now. So
how's he looked when he's been fit, Sam Lavelle?
Good. He looks a little shaky in the 3 on the right, but
Okay.
I think that's just because he preferred to be in the middle. But you couldn't put when Paul's playing, you couldn't put Paul on the right of a 3 at his age. But in the 2 with John Mellish, who, I mean, I love John Mellish, but his discipline this season playing in a 2 instead of a 3 has been superb.
In a back 4, I think that would be quite because I think in the 3, what you get is that flexibility where Mellish can push into midfield, and you've got
he's been superb in the 4. He's been absolutely superb. He's sort of temperament and his sort of maturity in the game has come on massively in the last couple of years. He was always a bit of a headless chicken at times, but I think since he went back to centre half when Simo came in, really from midfield, he just looks a comfortable League One player for me, and that's great. That's something that you might not have seen. This is a player we were going to release under Beach, so brilliant. I think we need, similar to Exeter, we need goals. I think the advantage we've got over Exeter, while they have got a bit of money to spend, I think we've got hopefully a bit of a step that we can go, okay, this season we can maybe go a little bit over the top and do what we can to stay up. Hopefully that's enough. I don't really want to do that. I mean, we've spoken about sort of sustainable stuff. I wouldn't want to do that long term. I hate when owners come in and it's just throwing money left, right and centre, because it shouldn't be what the game's about. It should be a bit more gradual and a bit more development. And that's why these new owners have really impressed me, in that it's not just about the first team. It's about, we want the youth academy to be better. We want the training facilities to be better. We want the ground to be better. And it's all about increasing revenue as well, rather than just let's throw money at it and see what happens.
Yeah.
Which is great. But I think for us, it's scoring goals. I don't think anyone expected Joe Garner to be starting week in, week out this season.
Is that going to be a big part of the January plan then, getting in a striker? Obviously, there's the right back situation that you mentioned.
Yeah.
But
I think centre midfield and strikers is the key. We are going to have to get a right back, just because of Finn Back's been unable to be fit this season. It's not sort of, it's a one injury, it's a problem. He's getting different ones quite a lot. So we are going to have to go down that road with Callum Guy now missing for 10 months, probably.
That's a real shame.
We are going to have to go and get a central midfielder. There's another rumour of one of those on a free agent, but again, it's not, the rumour mill just goes a bit mad with free agents. I think people just put 2 and 2
might have
together.
to replace Moxon as well, Ross, if he
potentially,
goes
if he does want to go in January. I think the difference between losing him in the summer and losing him now is you feel like we could probably replace him if he went now. Not necessarily to a player of the same caliber, but enough to not leave a huge gaping hole in the team. But it's up front that's the problem. We're not creating enough. We kind of built the squad around a 5-3-2, and as that hasn't worked, we've gone back to the 4-3-3. But when we built the squad, we didn't really buy any wingers. So we're playing 4-3-3 with no wingers. We're playing Sean Maguire out wide and Jordan Gibson. who
I
can
mean,
fail.
again, it was probably down to the budgetary issues where
Yeah.
Simpson probably felt he had to commit to one formation, but actually he seems to like having that flexibility to flip between two. Because last season it certainly wasn't a 3-5-2 or 5-3-2 the whole way through. It was
No. If we didn't start badly last season, he just pushed John Mellish into midfield and went 4-3-3 anyway.
or push Jordan Gibson from midfield to attack
Yeah.
and that kind of thing. Yeah,
and that's what he likes to have.
Yeah, well, listen. Hopefully, Carlisle can make the additions that you need in January. But it's so great to see so much hope for the club going forward, and hopefully some exciting times ahead, mate.
Yeah,
lovely. Well, listen. Thanks for talking to us, Ross, and look forward to linking up with you later in the season.
Cheers, mate. See you later.
Cheers.
Take care, Ross. Cheers.
Yeah, Jack. So we've heard from a lot of fans about their chances of beating the drop this season. We weren't quite able to get hold of a Fleetwood or a Northampton fan, but I just wanted to assess the chances for some of these clubs. First of all, are we kind of agreed that Reading and Cheltenham are going to be in big trouble, or do you see ownership for Reading or the Darrell Clarke revival for Cheltenham giving either of those a little bit of hope?
For me, I'll be blunt as honest as I possibly can. I think Reading are in deep trouble. I think Reading, for me, look down, to be quite frank. Cheltenham are really difficult because Darrell Clarke, I'm really, really impressed with already how he's made movement and change within that squad, and the results, have been mixed. It hasn't, he hasn't won every game since he's come in, but there is a real improvement. And some will say, look, could it have got much worse? And to be honest, Gab, it probably couldn't have done, but they have looked much better, and he has galvanized that group of players that, at the time when he came in looked at rock bottom. So I can't be certain. I can't be certain on anything. Football is so interesting and so ever changing. It's hard to predict. I would say if I was going to put one team down there with little pressure in saying it, Reading would be that one. Carlisle, Ross has sold me on Carlisle on that ownership. I don't know. I'm sure, of course, the supporters are always going to try and be optimistic. And even if, and I believe that Ross is saying everything and believes everything he's saying, but it seems ambitious. As business plans go, thinking that a championship status is around the corner is extremely exciting. Whether or not that is as simple as maybe it might turn out to be, or it could possibly turn out to be, is another question. But if the ownership is going to be as lucrative in the way that they spend some money, then of course it's going to be a really exciting future for them. If I was going to rank them, though, I'd still have to put Cheltenham in there. And sorry, Fleetwood obviously be included in that conversation.
They've enjoyed a bit of a resurgence lately, haven't they?
Speaking to Nappers, he seems very, very confident they're going to stay up. So, and he's going to say that as well, isn't it? There's a bit of a theme here. I say Reading. As I like to rank them, I'd go Reading. And sorry, the other team you'd like to put in that one in the hat?
So let's start with. I would actually argue, Northampton. I've got a little bit of faith in, but I appreciate that it's going to get quite tight, and something's got to give at some point. But I do think the fact they've got Mark Leonard for now, I think, is a huge factor. I think they've got a goal scorer in Sam Hoskins, and I do feel like they've got a template that could keep them up. But with Fleetwood improving, and Exeter will be able to spend in January, I wouldn't begrudge you if you felt like they could be the ones to drop into the bottom four.
I've got an order, I think. So
go for your order.
So from Reading, Carlisle, Fleetwood, Northampton, Exeter, Cheltenham, I'd go Reading as most likely.
Okay.
Number one. I then probably go. You probably would have to still go Cheltenham as number two.
Mm-hmm.
I then go Northampton number three. I then go Fleetwood number 5, and I'd go Exeter number 6.
Okay. Sorry, who's number 4? Did we say?
Reading number 1. It'd be. Carlisle. Carlisle number 4.
Carlisle number 4. Okay. Yeah, I think at this stage you'd have to say Carlisle are less likely to go down than Northampton, just because of that promise of January money.
Hence why I put them only one place that is tight.
Yeah, it's very difficult. This. You
maybe did this last time on the show, Gary. You maybe did this last time.
I know. I did it from sort of the group of teams just above.
And this is just as painful and just as difficult. Only a couple of weeks on.
I think Ed's glad that he got out of this one. Yeah, I think we've kind of got to say, with the Simpson factor as well, Carlisle aren't going to be the ones behind Cheltenham and Reading. Yeah, I'd probably concede to Northampton there, although I do have some faith in John Brady. I'm sort of a little bit unsure about Fleetwood just from an ownership point of view, but in terms of the way they've played recently, they've got Phoenix Patterson, who's been in great form for them. There's a lot of encouragement, I think, that they can have from the way they've played lately. Junior Cortina is such an exciting prospect. Brendan Wirradu has been great lately. Ryan Broom I like as well. I feel like there's a lot of, and of course they've got Jack Marriott too. So I'm kind of feeling Fleetwood are looking good, and this is why it's such a difficult one to call, isn't it, Jack? Because it feels like for a lot of teams you can kind of talk yourself into them staying up, can't you?
Yeah, it's really tight, and even just by you speaking there, I'd probably have to speak about Exeter and their injuries and the fact that their recruitment is obvious where they need to strengthen up top, and that doesn't make things sometimes as straightforward going into a window. I actually probably think Fleetwood would be my number 6 and Exeter would be my number 5. I think I probably have to swap them round. I think Fleetwood have been better than Exeter, but there's no guarantee. And you asked me this question in November. We're still it's a chunk of the season gone, and to only have Reading as a team that I'm pretty certain are going down, that's the only name. That just shows how this league is going to change really, really quickly, and has already changed and changed perceptions quickly. Because normally, you'd have sort of two, because maybe you do, maybe Cheltenham is your comfortable number 2, and I've got them down as my second likeliest to get relegated. But at the same time, I'm not totally convinced, because Darrell Clarke is a top manager, and he'll be very, very eager to get them out of the mess that they found themselves in when he came in, and already has made steps to improve it. I think it's really close and really tight.
I would actually, even though Cheltenham have had that resurgence under Clarke, and I'm so impressed with what he's done, I would actually even have Reading as slightly likelier to stay up than Cheltenham, just because I think of the ownership. I think the possibility that the right experienced heads coming in could just give them a shift of momentum, and I think some of the potential that they've shown in cup competitions could come to life a little bit more, as well as maybe the possibility of a manager change as well. But I think that there's a case for every team, I think, to stay up. Absolutely. Which is why I suppose I'm thinking in terms of the relegation. Well, I think a lot of the bottom sides are going to take a lot of points off some of the teams towards the top. So as a complete opposite of 2 seasons ago, when Fleetwood stayed up on 40 points and Argyle missed out on the top 6 with 80. I think it's going to be way more even than that this year. And I actually think in terms of the relegation battle, some of the teams ahead, like Port Vale, like Shrewsbury, like Cambridge, like Burton, they're not going to be safe, and they're going to be kept honest right until the end of the season.
Yeah, you're right. I think it's going to be really, really, really close down there, and I think it's going to be a case of, it's a cliche, but it could go right down to the wire. I think there's going to be a lot of teams down there very, very close coming into the season, especially, January. It's what teams do in January, isn't it? It's what teams do in January and how they integrate it, and the strategy that they want to go down. Are they going to try and, if Reading get a takeover, they're going to try and sign 6, 7, 8 players? I mean, from speaking to the guest today, I don't think that's going to be the case. It looks as though they're going down the route of almost, let's accept the position we're in and make sure we're stable when we try and go for it again. It's not nice for a fan to hear that, but sometimes you've got to look at the long term. With Carlisle, the money that we've been already mentioned in this show, it sounds lucrative. It sounds very, very exciting. There's a risk element to that. Throwing money at anything at a business is massively risky. There's a huge chance those players you bring in, you spend that sort of money and it doesn't work, or it takes the time to click. You maybe then look at it and you go, well, we signed these players. We'll give, if we do go down to League 2, we've got a phenomenal squad. But let's be honest, if you're trying to spend big in January, it's because you want to try and stay in the league, not because you're building for next season. And then Fleetwood, we don't know quite that ownership and the situation for them going into January. You imagine Lee Johnson in his first window is going to want to have a little bit of movement. And Exeter, even Northampton to an extent, and Cheltenham, they're going to want to, again, bolster that team. and they've all got areas in which they do need to strengthen. It's just which and who they can bring in and how they can do it with the budget they've got. I think after January, we have a real look at it. But as of right now, on the 22nd of November at this table, the final international break before March, it's exceptionally close.
Certainly is. It's going to be a really fascinating second half of the season, I think. Jack, it's been great to talk it through with you this evening, and everyone, just to reiterate, go check out the Jack Ward Football Podcast and the League One Football, the League One podcast as well, because that's having a meteoric rise at the moment, and that's wonderful to see because you do some great stuff, Jack. So thanks for joining us.
Cheers, man.
Thanks to you for watching at home. This has been the EFL Debate, the League One podcast, and we'll see you again very soon.